In 1942, U.S. Army nurse Helen Brooks vanished from a frontline hospital in southern Italy and was never seen again. The Army claimed she was executed for collaborating with the enemy. But 40 years later, her granddaughter, Captain Sarah Brooks, uncovered a photograph in classified military folders nobody could explain. It showed Helen alive, weeks after her disappearance, standing beside Axis soldiers in a remote village. And what that photo revealed would expose a betrayal buried since the war, and a death her own command tried to erase. Captain Sarah Brooks had seen enough classified files to know when something didn't belong. After 8 years as an Army medical officer, she could spot inconsistencies that would slip past most people. But this photograph made her stomach drop in ways that had nothing to do with military protocol. The black and white image stared up at her from a manila folder marked Historical Review, Italy 1942. Her grandmother's face smiled back from 40 years in the past, standing beside 3 men in German uniforms outside what looked like a bombed church. Helen Brooks, the family traitor, the nurse who'd supposedly collaborated with the enemy and died for it. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the photograph closer to the fluorescent lights of the Fort Bragg archives room. She'd been researching field hospital protocols for her master's thesis when she'd found the misfiled folder. Just routine academic work that had suddenly become anything but routine. "You finding what you need in there, Captain?" Sergeant Murphy's voice from the doorway made Sarah jump. She slipped the photo back into the folder, her heart hammering. "Yes, just about finished. Medical unit organizational charts from the Italian campaign." "That old stuff's fascinating. My grandfather fought at Anzio. Said the field hospitals saved more lives than anything else we did over there." Sarah forced a smile. The nurses were heroes. Not all of them, her mind added bitterly, not according to family legend. After Murphy left, Sarah pulled the photo out again. The image was clearer than any she'd seen of her grandmother. Most family photos had been destroyed after the Army's notification in 1943. Her father had burned everything in shame, keeping only one formal portrait that sat in a drawer, never displayed. But this Helen looked relaxed, almost happy. She wore her Army nurse uniform, the Red Cross armband clearly visible. The German soldiers beside her weren't restraining her or threatening her. They looked like they were posing for a casual snapshot. Sarah checked the back of the photograph. Someone had written in faded pencil, "Monte Cassino region, November 1942, HB with contacts." November 1942, 3 weeks after Helen's supposed execution for collaboration. Sarah's mind raced. If Helen had been executed in October, how was she alive and apparently free in November? And what did contacts mean? She photographed the image with her camera before returning the folder to its proper place. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she'd been told about her grandmother was wrong, or worse. Back in her small apartment off base, Sarah spread the few family documents she possessed across her kitchen table. Her grandfather's death certificate from 1961, her father's discharge papers from Korea, and buried at the bottom of a shoebox, the single letter the Army had sent her great-grandmother in 1943. "We regret to inform you that Lieutenant Helen Brooks was killed while collaborating with enemy forces in the Italian theater. Due to the nature of her actions, she will not be eligible for military honors or burial in a national cemetery." Sarah had read the letter once as a teenager and never touched it again. The shame had been too heavy, the family wound too deep. Her father had died in 1979 without ever speaking Helen's name aloud. But now, staring at the photograph, Sarah wondered what else the Army hadn't told them. She pulled out a magnifying glass and studied every detail. The German uniforms were clean, well-pressed, not combat gear. The church behind them showed battle damage, but the area around it looked peaceful. No signs of active fighting. And Helen's expression. Sarah had spent years studying facial trauma, reading pain and fear in patients' faces. She saw neither in her grandmother's eyes. Helen looked confident, purposeful, even proud. Not like a collaborator. Not like a prisoner either. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the number for the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. If she was going to destroy her family's carefully constructed peace, she needed more than one photograph. Records Center, this is Janet. This is Captain Sarah Brooks, U.S. Army Medical Corps. I need to request personnel files for a deceased relative. I'll need the full name, service number if you have it, and dates of service. Lieutenant Helen Brooks, served 1941 to 1943, died in Italy. I don't have her service number, but she was attached to the 95th Evacuation Hospital. Let me check our database. Hold, please. Sarah waited, drumming her fingers on the table. Through her window, she could see the lights of Fort Bragg in the distance. Soldiers training, officers planning, the endless cycle of military life continuing as it had for decades. Ma'am, I'm showing a Helen Brooks in our system, but there's a problem. What kind of problem? Her file is classified, sealed by military intelligence in 1943. I can't release any information without proper authorization from the Department of Defense. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Classified? Why would a nurse's file be classified? I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't discuss the reasons for classification. You'd need to file a formal request through the Freedom of Information Act, but even then, wartime intelligence files are rarely released. Sarah hung up and stared at the photograph again. Nurses didn't get classified files unless they were involved in something far beyond medical care. She thought about her career, her reputation, the quiet life she'd built in the shadow of her family's shame. Opening this door might destroy everything she'd worked for, but Helen's face seemed to challenge her from across 40 years. The proud lift of her chin, the steady gaze, the uniform worn with obvious honor. Sarah made her decision. She pulled out a notepad and began making a list of everyone who might have served with Helen in Italy. Veterans organizations, historical societies, military historians. If the Army wouldn't tell her the truth about her grandmother, she'd find it herself, even if it killed her. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Post in Fayetteville smelled like stale beer and old tobacco. Sarah had never been inside one before, but desperation made strange allies. She clutched a manila envelope containing copies of the photograph and Helen's service information as she approached the bar where 3 elderly men nursed their drinks. "Excuse me, I'm looking for veterans who might have served in Italy during 1942. The bartender, a heavy-set man with graying hair, looked her up and down. "You military?" "Captain Sarah Brooks, Fort Bragg Medical Corps." "What you need with Italy?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled out the photograph. "I'm trying to find information about my grandmother. She was a nurse with the 95th Evacuation Hospital." The man on the far stool turned around slowly. He had to be in his 70s, with deep lines carved around pale blue eyes. 95th Evac? I was with the 36th Infantry. We worked with them field hospitals plenty. Sarah's heart jumped. "Do you remember any of the nurses?" "Some. Brave women. Saved my life twice." He squinted at the photograph. "What's your grandmother's name?" "Helen Brooks?" The man's expression changed instantly. His face went hard, the friendliness vanishing. "Brooks. You knew her?" "I knew of her." He stood up, throwing money on the bar. "And I got nothing to say about that woman." "Wait, please." Sarah followed him toward the door. "I just want to understand what happened." He spun around, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What happened is she got good men killed. She fed information to the Germans that cost American lives. You want to honor her memory, find a different hobby. But this photograph shows her alive after... I don't care what that photograph shows. Your grandmother was a traitor, and bringing up her name in here is an insult to every man who died fighting those bastards." He pushed through the door, leaving Sarah standing in the sudden quiet of the bar. The other patrons stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. The bartender leaned forward. "Maybe you should go, miss." Outside, Sarah sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The veteran's reaction had been immediate and visceral. Not the response of someone repeating old gossip, but of someone who had personal knowledge, personal hatred. She drove back to Fort Bragg with more questions than answers. If Helen had betrayed Allied positions, why was she photographed casually with German soldiers instead of being interrogated or imprisoned? And why had her file been classified by military intelligence? Back in her apartment, Sarah spread out a map of Italy and tried to piece together the timeline. The 95th Evacuation Hospital had been stationed near Salerno during the Allied landings. Helen had supposedly collaborated and been executed in October 1942. But the photograph was dated November 1942 in the Monte Cassino region, nearly 100 miles inland from Salerno. Sarah picked up her phone and called her department head at Walter Reed, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. If anyone could help her navigate military bureaucracy, it was Chen. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" "I need a favor. A big one. I'm trying to access classified personnel records from World War II." "That's not exactly my area of expertise. What's this about?" Sarah explained about the photograph, leaving out the family connection. Chen listened without interrupting. "You said the file was sealed by military intelligence?" "That's what they told me at the Records Center." "Sarah, files don't stay classified for 40 years unless there's something significant in them. Usually something that could still compromise national security or embarrass important people." "What kind of things?" "Intelligence operations, spy networks, cover-ups of friendly fire incidents or war crimes, things that could still hurt people or reveal methods we still use." Sarah felt a chill. What if she wasn't a traitor? What if she was working for us? Then why would the Army tell her family she was executed for collaboration? To protect her real mission or to protect other people involved? Chen was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, be very careful. If you're right about this, you're dealing with people who have kept secrets for 40 years. They might not appreciate you digging them up." After hanging up, Sarah made herself a cup of coffee and sat down with a yellow legal pad. She wrote Helen Brooks at the top and began listing everything she knew. Disappeared October 1942 from 95th Evacuation Hospital near Salerno. Army notified family she was executed for collaboration. Photograph shows her alive in November 1942 near Monte Cassino with German soldiers. File classified by military intelligence. Veterans still angry about her betrayal 40 years later. Under that, she wrote her questions. Was she really a traitor? Was she working undercover for U.S. intelligence? Why was she photographed with Germans instead of being held prisoner? What happened to her after November 1942? Who classified her file and why? As she stared at the list, Sarah realized she was looking at this backwards. Instead of trying to prove Helen's innocence, she should assume the official story was wrong and work from there. If Helen had been a spy or undercover operative, her collaboration would have been a cover story. The Army would have told her family she was dead to protect her mission and other operatives. But something had gone wrong. The photograph suggested Helen had been blown, her cover compromised. The Germans knew who she really was. Sarah picked up the photograph again, studying the German soldiers' faces. They didn't look suspicious or angry. They looked satisfied, even pleased, like they had won something. Sarah's blood ran cold as a new possibility occurred to her. What if Helen hadn't been executed by the Germans? What if she'd been killed by her own side to keep her from talking? The phone rang, making her jump. She glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Hello? Silence, then a click as someone hung up. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart pounding. Wrong number, probably. But as she turned off the lights and headed to bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, that someone knew what she was looking for, and didn't want her to find it. Sarah woke to the sound of someone trying her door handle. The soft metallic click came at 3:17 a.m., barely audible over the hum of her air conditioner. She lay perfectly still, listening. Another click, then the faint scrape of metal against metal. Someone was picking her lock. Sarah slipped out of bed and grabbed the Beretta .22 from her nightstand. Military housing wasn't supposed to need deadbolts, but 8 years as an Army officer had taught her that supposed to didn't stop determined people. The front door opened with a whisper of hinges. Sarah pressed herself against the bedroom wall, weapon ready. Footsteps moved carefully across her living room, avoiding the spots where the floorboards creaked. Professional movement, someone who knew how to search without being detected. Through the crack under her door, she saw a thin beam of flashlight sweep across the room. The intruder was looking for something specific, the kitchen table where she'd left her research. Sarah heard papers rustling, drawers being opened and closed, the sound of someone photographing documents. After 10 minutes, the footsteps moved toward her bedroom. The door handle turned slowly. Sarah raised her weapon, finger on the trigger. Stop right there. The handle released immediately. Footsteps ran toward the front door. Sarah yanked her bedroom door open in time to see a figure in dark clothing disappear through her front entrance. She pursued to the doorway but stopped, training overriding impulse. Chasing an unknown threat into darkness was how people got killed. She locked the door and turned on every light in the apartment. Her research was gone. The photograph, her notes, the copy of Helen's death notification, even the manila envelope. Whoever had broken in knew exactly what they were looking for. Sarah checked her bedroom safe. The original photograph was still there, along with her backup copies. She'd learned caution from years of dealing with classified medical records. But the message was clear. Someone was watching her investigation. Someone with the skills to pick locks and move silently through her home. Someone who wanted Helen Brooks to stay buried. Sarah made coffee with shaking hands and sat down to think. The break-in proved she was onto something important, but it also meant she was in danger. At 6 a.m., she called Fort Bragg Security and reported the burglary. The military police who responded took her statement and dusted for fingerprints, but Sarah knew they'd find nothing useful. This had been too professional. "Any idea what they were after, Captain?" Sergeant Willis asked, examining her front door. "Research materials for my master's thesis, World War II medical records." Willis raised an eyebrow. "Someone broke into an Army officer's quarters to steal old hospital records?" "Apparently." "You sure you're not working on something more sensitive than medical procedures?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm researching field hospital protocols from the Italian campaign, nothing classified." After the MPs left, Sarah drove to work early and spent the morning thinking instead of focusing on her patients. Whoever had broken in would be back when they realized she had copies. She needed help, but military channels would take weeks and might alert the wrong people. At lunch, she drove to the public library in downtown Fayetteville and found the reference section. If official sources wouldn't help her, she'd try unofficial ones. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes, approached after Sarah had been researching for an hour. "Finding what you need, dear?" "I'm looking for information about World War II veterans from this area, specifically anyone who might have served in Italy. We have several oral history projects, local men who shared their war stories before they passed." "What unit are you researching?" "The 95th Evacuation Hospital." The librarian's expression shifted slightly. "That's oddly specific. Most people research infantry units or air squadrons." "I'm trying to find information about a nurse who served with them." "Ah, well, we do have some materials. There's a gentleman who comes in here regularly, Mr. Kowalski. He's writing a book about medical units in Italy. Might be helpful." "Is he here often?" "Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Sits right over there." She pointed to a corner table near the history section. "He'll be in this afternoon if you want to wait." Sarah spent the afternoon reading newspaper accounts of the Italian campaign. At 2 p.m., an elderly man with thick glasses and a walking cane made his way to the corner table, carrying a briefcase and a stack of notebooks. Sarah approached carefully. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Sarah Brooks. The librarian said you might be able to help me." He looked up, studying her with intelligent brown eyes. "Help with what?" "I'm researching the 95th Evacuation Hospital, specifically a nurse named Helen Brooks." His face went completely still. "Why?" "She was my grandmother. I'm trying to understand what really happened to her." Kowalski stared at her for a long moment, then glanced around the library. "Not here. Too many ears. Meet me at Denny's on Bragg Boulevard at 7 p.m. Come alone." "Mr. Kowalski, I just need 7 p.m. He packed up his materials and left without another word. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation. Kowalski's reaction suggested he knew something about Helen, but his caution implied it was dangerous knowledge. At 7 p.m. sharp, she found him in a back booth at Denny's, nursing a cup of coffee. He'd positioned himself where he could watch both the entrance and the back exit. "You have identification?" he asked as she sat down. Sarah showed him her military ID. He studied it carefully. "Captain Sarah Brooks, Army Medical Corps. You really Helen's granddaughter?" "Yes, sir." "Your grandmother saved my life, twice, once from German artillery, once from my own command." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Helen Brooks wasn't a traitor. She was one of the bravest women I ever met, but the story they told your family." He shook his head. "That was necessary to protect other operations." "Other operations?" Kowalski glanced around the restaurant again. "Your grandmother was working for the Office of Strategic Services, what they called OSS. She was feeding false medical intelligence to German contacts while secretly treating Allied prisoners and resistance fighters." Sarah felt her world shift. She was a spy. More than that, she was running a network that saved hundreds of lives, Allied soldiers, Italian partisans, even German deserters who wanted out of the war. Then why did the Army tell us she was executed for collaboration? Because she was discovered. The Germans figured out what she was doing and killed her. But if the truth had come out, it would have exposed other OSS operatives still working in Europe. So they created the collaboration story to explain her death. Sarah pulled out the photograph. "Then what's this?" Kowalski studied the image, his face grave. "Where did you get this?" "In classified military files at Fort Bragg." "This was taken 3 days before they killed her. Those aren't German soldiers, Captain. They're OSS operatives in German uniforms. Your grandmother was reporting on a successful mission to extract Allied prisoners from a German field hospital." "The people with her were Americans?" "Americans, British, Free French, all working together to save lives behind enemy lines." Kowalski handed the photograph back. "Your grandmother died a hero, but someone doesn't want that story told." "Who?" "Someone who's been keeping this secret for 40 years. Someone who broke into your apartment last night." Sarah's blood went cold. "How do you know about that?" "Because they came to my house first." Kowalski rolled up his left sleeve, revealing fresh bandages wrapped around his forearm. "They were more direct with me. Asked what I knew about Helen Brooks, what records I had, who I'd talked to." Sarah stared at the bandages. "They tortured you?" "Just enough to make their point. Old man like me, they figured I'd break easy." His eyes hardened. "They figured wrong." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. But they knew I had documents about your grandmother's real mission. Tore my house apart looking for them." He tapped his temple. "Too bad for them I keep the important stuff up here." Sarah glanced around the restaurant. The dinner crowd was thinning out, leaving mostly empty booths. "Are we safe here?" "Safer than your apartment or my house. Public places make them nervous." Kowalski leaned forward. "Captain, you need to understand what you're dealing with. The people who killed your grandmother weren't just German intelligence. They had help from someone on our side." "What do you mean?" "Helen's network was compromised from the inside. Someone with access to OSS communications told the Germans exactly where to find her." He paused. "That someone is still alive, still protecting their secret. After 40 years? Some secrets don't have expiration dates. Your grandmother discovered something before she died, something that could destroy reputations, maybe even bring down people in high places." Sarah felt sick. "What kind of something?" "She found evidence that American officers were selling Allied troop movements to German intelligence, not for ideology, for money, cash payments in Swiss bank accounts." "You're talking about treason." "I'm talking about a conspiracy that went all the way to the top of military command in Italy. Your grandmother was going to expose it when she was killed." Kowalski reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a copy of her last radio transmission to OSS headquarters, never made it into official files." Sarah unfolded the paper. Helen's words, transmitted in code and later decrypted, stared back at her. "Have identified 3 American officers taking German payments. Evidence secured. Request immediate extraction. Networks compromised. They know about me. If I don't make contact in 48 hours, check Swiss account number 847-239-1156. HB." "She never made contact," Kowalski said quietly. 48 hours later, she was dead, shot twice in the back of the head and dumped in a German uniform to make it look like a collaboration gone wrong. Sarah read the message again. "This Swiss account number, still active as of 6 months ago. Regular deposits from 3 sources. 2 dead, 1 still very much alive." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've spent 30 years investigating what happened to the best woman I ever knew. Your grandmother saved my life, Captain. I owed her the truth." Sarah stared at the transmission. "Who were the 3 officers?" "Colonel James Morrison, killed in action 2 weeks after Helen died. Major Frank Weber, died in a car accident in 1947. And Captain Klaus Richter, who survived the war and disappeared in 1945. Disappeared. Changed his name, new identity, probably came to America with other German scientists and defectors. The man who broke into your apartment, who tortured me. I'd bet money he's Klaus Richter." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. "German accent?" "Slight. Covered well, but still there after 40 years. "What's his name now?" "I've been trying to figure that out for decades, but I know he's been watching your family, making sure nobody got too curious about Helen's real story." Sarah thought about her father, who died young of a heart attack at 53. About her grandfather, who'd refused to talk about the war and drank himself to death. "You think he killed my family members?" "I think he eliminated anyone who might ask the right questions. Natural deaths, accidents, nothing suspicious. Until now." "What changed?" "You did. Military officer with security clearance, researching in classified files. You have access to records that could expose him." Kowalski finished his coffee and signaled for the check. "Captain, you have 2 choices. Walk away now, forget everything you've learned, and maybe live a quiet life, or help me finish what your grandmother started." "Finish it how?" "Prove Klaus Richter is still alive. Find evidence of the Swiss account payments. Expose the truth about Helen's murder and the conspiracy that killed her." "That's incredibly dangerous." "Your grandmother knew it was dangerous too. She did it anyway because it was right." Sarah stared at Helen's final transmission, her grandmother's last words, a cry for help that had gone unanswered for 40 years. "If I help you, what do we do first?" "We find Klaus Richter, and we make him pay for what he did." Kowalski stood up, moving carefully with his walking cane. "Meet me tomorrow at the old Confederate cemetery on Ramsey Street, 2 p.m. Bring copies of everything you found, but leave the originals somewhere safe." "Why the cemetery?" "Because it's the last place Klaus would expect us to meet, and because your grandmother is buried there under her real name. Time you paid your respects to a war hero." As Kowalski limped toward the exit, Sarah realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from anger. Her grandmother had died trying to save lives and expose traitors. Her family had lived in shame for 40 years because of lies told to protect a murderer. That ended now. Sarah paid the check and walked to her car, scanning the parking lot for watchers. She saw nothing suspicious, but that meant little. Professional surveillance was designed to be invisible. As she drove back to Fort Bragg, Sarah thought about the Swiss account number Helen had transmitted before her death. Modern banking regulations would make those records difficult to access, but not impossible for someone with the right connections. She knew someone who might help. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had mentioned that sensitive files sometimes remained classified to protect people who could still be embarrassed or prosecuted. If Klaus Richter was still alive, still receiving payments from that Swiss account, Chen might know how to prove it. Sarah pulled into her apartment complex and sat in her car for 10 minutes, watching for movement in the shadows. Her front door had been repaired, but she knew locks wouldn't stop someone determined to get in. Tonight, she wasn't going home. Instead, she drove to an off-base motel and paid cash for a room. She'd learned enough about Klaus Richter to know he didn't make empty threats. But she'd also learned something else. Her grandmother had been a hero who died protecting Allied lives and trying to expose traitors. Sarah Brooks was going to finish the job. The Confederate cemetery sat in the oldest part of Fayetteville, its weathered headstones and twisted oak trees creating pockets of shadow even at midday. Sarah arrived early, walking the gravel paths while scanning for anyone who didn't belong. She found Helen's grave in the back corner, marked by a simple granite stone. Helen Brooks, 1914 to 1942, beloved daughter. No mention of military service, no recognition of sacrifice, just the bare facts that had replaced a hero's legacy with family shame. Sarah knelt beside the grave, brushing leaves from the headstone. "I'm going to fix this, grandmother. I'm going to tell them who you really were." She would have liked that. Sarah spun around to find Kowalski approaching slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. In daylight, she could see how much last night's encounter had aged him. His face was pale, his movements careful. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm 92 years old and somebody used me for knife practice." He lowered himself onto a nearby bench. "But I've felt worse." "What did you find out?" Kowalski pulled out a manila folder. Klaus Richter. Born Munich, 1920. Wehrmacht intelligence officer captured near Monte Cassino in November 1942. Supposedly died in Allied custody, but no body was ever recovered. Supposedly? Paper trail shows he was recruited by U.S. intelligence in 1943. Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of German scientists and officers to America after the war. Klaus came with them. Sarah studied the documents. What was his new identity? That's where it gets interesting. Klaus became Carl Brennan, naturalized citizen, settled in North Carolina in 1947. Worked as a translator for the State Department until 1952, then moved into private business. Carl Brennan. Sarah felt the name like a physical blow. That's not possible. You know the name? Carl Brennan owns half the businesses in this county. Construction, real estate, defense contracting. He's been a pillar of the community for 30 years. And Klaus Richter has been hiding in plain sight, getting rich off defense contracts while keeping watch on the Brooks family. Sarah stared at the documents. Carl Brennan had spoken at her high school graduation. His company had donated the new wing to the local hospital. He sat on the city council, the Chamber of Commerce, the Veterans Affairs Board. If this is true, why hasn't anyone noticed? German accent, wartime background. Time changes everything. Accents fade, documents get buried, people forget. And Klaus was smart enough to build legitimacy slowly. War hero story, wounded veteran who lost his records in bombing. People wanted to believe in redemption after the war. Sarah thought about all the times she'd seen Carl Brennan at community events. Distinguished older man, silver hair, expensive suits. Always generous with donations, always ready with a patriotic speech, always watching. How do we prove it? We need the Swiss bank records, proof that Carl Brennan is still receiving payments from the account Helen discovered. Kowalski handed her another folder. These are contact numbers for 3 people who can help. Use the code phrase Helen's Legacy, and they'll know what you need. Who are they? People who've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask the right questions. OSS veterans, intelligence analysts, banking investigators. They all knew something was wrong with Helen's case. Sarah looked at the phone numbers. What about you? I'm done, Captain. Last night convinced me I'm too old for this fight, but you... He smiled grimly. You're young, you're smart, and you've got official access that I never had. You can finish what your grandmother started. What if Carl Brennan finds out what I'm doing? Then you'd better be ready to fight. Klaus Richter didn't survive 40 years of hiding by being careless or merciful. Kowalski stood up slowly, using his cane for support. There's one more thing. Your grandmother's final mission, the one that got her killed. She wasn't just exposing the Swiss account conspiracy. What else? She discovered that Klaus was planning to sell the locations of all OSS networks in Southern Europe to German intelligence. Hundreds of Allied operatives would have been captured and killed. She died to save other spies. She died to save an entire resistance network. Klaus killed her to keep his plan secret, then sold the information anyway after the heat died down. Sarah felt rage building in her chest. How many people died because of him? We'll never know exactly, but intelligence estimates suggest Klaus's betrayals led to the deaths of at least 200 Allied operatives and resistance fighters. Sarah stared at Helen's grave. Her grandmother hadn't just been murdered. She'd been killed to facilitate mass betrayal that had cost hundreds of lives. I'm going to destroy him. Be careful, Captain. Klaus has had 40 years to build defenses, create contingencies. He won't go down easy. Neither will I. Kowalski limped away, leaving Sarah alone with her grandmother's grave and a burning need for justice. She pulled out her phone and dialed the first number on the list. Banking Security Division, this is Janet. I'm calling about Helen's Legacy. Silence, then. A different voice came on the line. Male, older, cautious. Who is this? Captain Sarah Brooks, U.S. Army Medical Corps. Helen Brooks was my grandmother. Jesus Christ, we've been waiting for this call for decades. How much do you know? Enough to want justice. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m., Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, near the World War II exhibit. I'll be wearing a red baseball cap. Bring photo identification and any documents you have. What's your name? Call me Frank. And Captain? Trust no one else with this information. Klaus has people everywhere. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, realizing she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. In 24 hours, she'd either have the evidence to destroy Carl Brennan or she'd be dead. She knelt beside Helen's grave one more time. I'm coming for him, grandmother, for you and for everyone else he killed. As Sarah walked back to her car, she didn't notice the figure watching from behind a mausoleum 50 yards away. Carl Brennan lowered his binoculars and reached for his phone. She made contact with the banking division, tomorrow in Washington. He listened to the voice on the other end, then smiled coldly. No, don't kill her yet. Let her gather the evidence first. Then we'll take everything she's found and eliminate all the loose ends at once. Carl ended the call and walked back to his Cadillac. After 40 years of careful planning, Klaus Richter's secret was about to be buried forever, along with everyone who threatened to expose it. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum buzzed with tourists and school groups, but Sarah spotted Frank immediately. He stood near a display of World War II fighter planes, a thin man in his 70s wearing a faded red baseball cap and a windbreaker that had seen better years. Captain Brooks? He approached carefully, eyes scanning the crowd. "You have ID?" Sarah showed him her military identification. Frank studied it, then led her deeper into the exhibit, past displays of B-17 bombers and P-51 Mustangs. 43 years I've been waiting for someone from Helen's family to ask the right questions, he said quietly. My name is Frank Morrison. I was OSS Communications Officer for Southern Europe. Sarah's breath caught. Morrison? Related to Colonel James Morrison? My uncle, the one Klaus murdered along with your grandmother. Frank's jaw tightened. Jimmy figured out what Klaus was doing, tried to stop him. Found dead in his tent the next morning, single gunshot to the head. Germans got blamed for infiltrating our camp. They stopped beside a display about code breakers. Frank pretended to read the placard while talking. I've spent 4 decades tracking Klaus's money trail. Swiss account 847-239-1156 has received regular deposits from 3 sources since 1943. 2 stopped when the other conspirators died. 1 continued until last month. Last month? Klaus got nervous when you started asking questions, transferred the money to a Cayman Islands account under a shell corporation. But I have copies of every transaction going back 40 years. Frank handed her a flash drive disguised as a key fob. Everything's on there, banking records, decoded German communications, Klaus's real identity documents, enough to put him away for life. Why haven't you used this before? Because I needed someone with official standing to present it. Military officer, security clearance, family connection to the case. Klaus has powerful friends who've protected him for years. They won't be able to ignore evidence presented by Helen Brooks's granddaughter. Sarah pocketed the flash drive. What's my next step? Take this to the Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Bragg, but be careful who you trust. Klaus didn't survive 40 years without having people inside military intelligence. How do I know who's safe? You don't. That's what made him so dangerous. Frank glanced around the museum again. There's something else. Klaus has been eliminating witnesses for decades. Your father, your grandfather, other OSS veterans who knew too much. All died of natural causes or accidents. He's been killing my family for 40 years? Slowly, carefully, nothing that would attract attention. Heart attacks, car crashes, hunting accidents, always with plausible deniability. Sarah felt sick. My father's heart attack. Digitalis poisoning mimics cardiac arrest perfectly, untraceable unless you know what to look for. Frank's voice was gentle. I'm sorry, Captain, but you needed to know what you're dealing with. He murdered my entire family. Everyone except you, and now he's going to try to finish the job. As if summoned by those words, Sarah noticed 2 men in dark suits moving through the museum crowds. They weren't looking at exhibits. They were looking for someone. Frank, we need to go, now. What is it? 2 men, suits, moving this way. They don't look like tourists. Frank glanced over casually, then grabbed Sarah's arm. Back exit. Stay calm. Don't run. They walked quickly through the museum, past displays of spacecraft and satellites. The 2 men had split up, flanking their route toward the main entrance. This way. Frank led her through a door marked Staff Only and down a service corridor. I know this place. Worked here part-time after I retired. Behind them, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor, moving fast now. Emergency exit ahead, Frank whispered. Once we're outside, split up. Meet me tonight at 8 p.m., Arlington Cemetery, Section 60. I'll have backup plans ready. They reached the exit door. Frank pushed it open, triggering an alarm that echoed through the building. Go. Different directions. Sarah ran left toward the metro station, while Frank went right toward the parking garage. Behind them, the 2 men burst through the exit door, shouting into radios. Sarah reached the metro platform just as a train arrived. She jumped on, watching through the window as one of the pursuers reached the platform too late. He spoke angrily into his radio, then pulled out a phone. 30 minutes later, Sarah sat in a coffee shop in Georgetown, trying to process what had happened. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, loaded with 40 years of evidence that could destroy Carl Brennan. But Klaus Richter had found them at the museum. Either Frank had been followed, or Klaus had people monitoring all the contacts on Kowalski's list. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Fort Bragg CID. She needed to get this evidence to someone who could act on it, but Frank's warning echoed in her mind. Klaus had people everywhere. Criminal Investigation Division, Sergeant Martinez. This is Captain Sarah Brooks, Army Medical Corps. I have evidence of war crimes and ongoing criminal conspiracy involving a German intelligence officer living under false identity in North Carolina. That's quite a claim, Captain. Can you be more specific? I have banking records showing payments from Nazi sources to American officers, evidence of murder conspiracy, and proof that a war criminal has been living as Carl Brennan for 40 years. Silence on the other end. Then, Captain, I think you need to speak with Colonel Patterson. Can you come in immediately? I'm in Washington. I can be there tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours. Bring all evidence and documentation. And, Captain, don't discuss this with anyone else. Sarah hung up, hoping she was making the right choice. Colonel Patterson might be trustworthy, or he might be one of Klaus's contacts. But she was running out of options. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Frank won't be meeting you tonight. Stop looking for answers you won't like. Last warning. CB. Sarah stared at the message, rage and fear warring in her chest. Carl Brennan had Frank, and he was threatening her directly, now. She thought about her grandmother, tortured and murdered for trying to expose this same man. About her father and grandfather, killed slowly over decades to keep Klaus's secrets safe. About Frank Morrison, probably dead already for helping her. Sarah made her decision. She wouldn't wait for Colonel Patterson. She wouldn't trust military channels that Klaus might have compromised. She was going to confront Carl Brennan directly, with the evidence that could destroy him, even if it killed her. Tonight. Carl Brennan's estate sat on 50 acres outside Fayetteville, surrounded by horse pastures and old-growth pine. Sarah drove past the entrance twice, studying the security setup. Camera-controlled gates, motion sensors along the fence line, and lights that would make nighttime approach nearly impossible. She parked a mile away and hiked through the woods, carrying a backpack with copies of the evidence and her service weapon. The original flash drive stayed hidden in her motel room safe, along with a letter explaining everything in case she didn't survive. Sarah had spent 6 hours planning this confrontation. Direct approach, maximum aggression, force Klaus to reveal what he'd done with Frank Morrison. If she was going to die, she'd at least get answers first. The estate's back boundary was marked by a split-rail fence that posed no real barrier. Sarah crossed it at 9 p.m., when the house light suggested dinner was finished, but bedtime was still hours away. She moved carefully through the pine trees, using night vision goggles borrowed from the base medical equipment inventory. The property was large enough that security couldn't monitor every acre, but Klaus was too smart to leave himself completely vulnerable. Sarah found the first motion sensor 30 yards from the house, disguised as a decorative lamp beside a garden path. She disarmed it with wire cutters, then moved to the next one. Klaus's security was thorough, but dated, designed to catch amateur intruders rather than military-trained infiltrators. The house itself was impressive, 2-story colonial with wraparound porches and enough square footage for a small hotel. Light spilled from the first-floor windows, and Sarah could see movement inside. She approached the kitchen window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Carl Brennan sat at a massive dining table, reading documents by lamplight. He looked older than Sarah remembered from community events, his silver hair thinner, his face more lined. But his posture remained erect, military straight after 40 years of hiding. On the table beside him lay Frank Morrison's red baseball cap. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Frank was here, somewhere in the house, probably basement or upstairs, probably still alive if Klaus needed information from him. She circled the house, looking for the best entry point. The front door was too exposed, but a side entrance near the kitchen looked promising. Single deadbolt, no visible alarms, positioned where she could approach from garden cover. Sarah picked the lock in 90 seconds, military training paying dividends. The door opened silently into a mudroom that connected to the kitchen. She could hear classical music playing softly from the dining room, could smell coffee and something that might have been apple pie. Normal domestic sounds that made Klaus's crimes seem even more obscene. Sarah drew her weapon and moved through the kitchen. The dining room was just beyond an archway, Klaus visible through the opening. She took a deep breath and stepped into view. Klaus Richter. Carl looked up from his reading, showing no surprise at finding an armed woman in his home. Captain Brooks, I was wondering when you'd arrive. Where's Frank Morrison? Safe for the moment. Please sit down. We have much to discuss. Klaus gestured to a chair across from him, his manner as calm as if he were hosting a dinner party. I'll stand, and I asked you a question. Mr. Morrison is upstairs, resting. Our conversation earlier today was rather intense, but he's alive, which is more than I can say for most people who've interfered with my business over the years. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Klaus's chest, including my grandmother. Ah, Helen, such a remarkable woman, brave, intelligent, utterly committed to her cause. Klaus smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. She reminded me very much of you. She exposed your conspiracy. That's why you killed her. I killed her because she left me no choice. Helen discovered my arrangement with certain German officers, yes? But more importantly, she threatened to expose the larger operation. What larger operation? Klaus stood slowly, hands visible, moving to a sidebar where crystal decanters held amber liquid. May I? This conversation requires something stronger than coffee. Don't move. Captain, if I wanted you dead, you would never have made it through my front door. I have questions for you, just as you have questions for me. Mutual curiosity, shall we say? Klaus poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then turned back to face her. The larger operation was quite simple. I was selling Allied intelligence to the highest bidder while simultaneously providing false information to German command. Playing both sides, you might say. You were a double agent? I was a businessman. Ideology is for fools. Money is eternal. Sarah felt sick. You betrayed everyone. I survived everyone. Colonel Morrison, Major Weber, your precious grandmother, all dead because they couldn't see the larger picture. The war was ending, Captain. Smart people were already planning for what came next. What came next was 40 years of murder. What came next was 40 years of prosperity. I built a legitimate business empire, contributed to this community, provided jobs for thousands of people. My past indiscretions were simply the price of admission to American success. Klaus took a sip of whiskey, studying Sarah over the rim of his glass. Your grandmother could have been part of that success. I offered her a share of the profits, protection for her family, comfortable retirement after the war. She chose martyrdom instead. She chose honor. She chose stupidity. Honor doesn't pay for college educations or medical bills or comfortable retirement. Money does. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. Where's the evidence she gathered? The proof of your conspiracy? Destroyed long ago, along with everyone who might have testified against me. Except for Mr. Morrison upstairs, you and I are the only people who know the complete truth. The banking records will disappear tonight, along with Mr. Morrison's 40 years of research. Amazing what house fires can destroy, Captain. Historical documents, computer files, even human remains. Klaus finished his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. Which brings us to your choice. What choice? Join me or die with Morrison. I'm offering you the same deal I offered your grandmother 40 years ago. 20% of my business holdings, enough money to retire in luxury anywhere in the world, and protection for any family you might eventually have." Sarah stared at him, barely able to process what she was hearing. "You think I would work with you? I think you're intelligent enough to recognize reality. I have powerful friends in military intelligence, federal law enforcement, and banking regulation. The evidence you've gathered could be dismissed as fabrication, your credibility destroyed, your career ended with a single phone call. Or you could kill me like you killed my family. Your father's heart attack was regrettable, but necessary. He was asking too many questions about his mother's war service. Your grandfather's hunting accident was similarly unfortunate, but necessary." Klaus reached into his jacket, and Sarah tensed, but he pulled out only a checkbook and a fountain pen. "I'm prepared to write you a check for $5 million tonight, Captain. Walking away money. Forget everything you've learned, except that your grandmother died a hero, but that the truth must remain buried and start a new life somewhere far from here. And if I refuse? Then you'll die tonight in the same house fire that claims Mr. Morrison and all the evidence he's collected over 4 decades. Tragic accident. Gas leak, perhaps. These old houses can be so dangerous." Sarah stared at Klaus, seeing not the distinguished community leader, but the Nazi intelligence officer who'd sold out hundreds of Allied operatives for money, who'd murdered her grandmother for trying to stop him, who'd spent 40 years systematically eliminating her family to protect his secrets. "I have a counteroffer," she said quietly. "Oh?" "Confess to everything. Full admission, recorded statement, names of everyone you've killed over 40 years. In exchange, I won't put a bullet in your head right now." Klaus laughed, the sound echoing off the dining room walls. "Captain, you're a military officer. You won't shoot an unarmed man in cold blood." "You want to bet your life on that?" "I'll bet my life on the fact that you're Helen Brooks' granddaughter. She could have killed me in Italy, but chose to try exposing me through proper channels instead. Honor over pragmatism. The same weakness that got her killed." Klaus reached for his jacket again, this time pulling out a chrome-plated pistol. "The same weakness that's about to get you killed." Sarah dove sideways as Klaus fired, the bullet shattering a crystal vase behind her. She rolled behind the dining table, using its massive bulk for cover. "Mr. Morrison is upstairs in the master bedroom," Klaus called out, his voice eerily calm. "Still alive for the moment, but if you don't surrender in the next 60 seconds, I'll put a bullet in his head and blame you for his death." Sarah calculated angles and distances. The table provided good cover from Klaus's position, but it also trapped her. If she tried to move, he'd have clear shots at her. 45 seconds, Captain." From upstairs, Sarah heard a muffled shout. Frank was definitely alive, probably tied up but trying to make noise. 30 seconds. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't let Frank die for helping her expose the truth about Helen, but she also couldn't let Klaus win. "I surrender," she called out, slowly placing her weapon on the floor and raising her hands. Klaus appeared around the edge of the table, his pistol trained on her head. "Excellent choice, Captain. Now we can—" Sarah lunged forward, inside Klaus's aim, her hands closing around his gun arm. They fought for control of the weapon, 40 years of comfortable living against 8 years of military training. The gun went off, the bullet punching into the ceiling. Sarah drove her knee into Klaus's stomach, doubling him over, then twisted the pistol from his grip. Klaus staggered backward, hands raised, his face pale with shock and pain. "It's over, Klaus," Sarah said, breathing hard. 40 years of murder ends tonight." But Klaus was smiling again, and Sarah realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Behind her, footsteps approached from the kitchen. Multiple people, moving with professional coordination. "I'm afraid it's just beginning, Captain," Klaus said as armed men surrounded her. "Did you really think I'd be here alone?" 4 men in tactical gear surrounded Sarah, weapons trained on her from every angle. Their movements were professional, coordinated, military precise, not hired muscle. These were operators with serious training. "Lower your weapon, Captain," the lead man ordered. He was younger than the others, maybe 35, with the kind of buzz cut and bearing that screamed Special Forces. Place it on the floor and step back. Sarah kept Klaus covered while scanning her options. 4 automatic weapons against 1 pistol, trapped in a dining room with limited cover. The mathematics of violence weren't in her favor. Who are you people? We're the ones who've been cleaning up Klaus's messes for 40 years, the team leader said. CIA, Defense Intelligence, people who understand that some secrets need to stay buried. Klaus straightened his jacket, recovering his composure. Captain Brooks, meet Operation Paperclip's cleanup crew. They've been protecting valuable assets like myself since 1945. Valuable assets? Sarah's voice was thick with disgust. He's a Nazi war criminal. He's a Nazi war criminal with 4 decades of intelligence on Soviet operations, Middle Eastern contacts, and banking networks that have prevented more terrorist attacks than you can imagine, the team leader said. Klaus Richter died in 1942. Carl Brennan has been serving American interests ever since. By murdering American citizens? By eliminating security risks, your grandmother threatened to expose an operation that saved thousands of Allied lives. Your father was asking questions that could have compromised ongoing missions. Sometimes patriotism requires difficult choices. Sarah felt her world tilting. These weren't rogue operators or Klaus's private army. They were official U.S. intelligence protecting a Nazi murderer in the name of national security. Place the weapon on the floor, Captain, the team leader repeated. We don't want to hurt you, but we will if necessary. What happens to me if I surrender? That depends on your willingness to see the bigger picture, Klaus said. Join the operation, accept the necessity of protecting state secrets, and you can have a very comfortable life. Continue this misguided crusade for your grandmother's memory, and you'll suffer the same fate as everyone else who's threatened American security. From upstairs, Frank Morrison's voice carried down, Sarah, don't trust them. They killed the others? One of the tactical team moved toward the stairs. Klaus nodded permission. Mr. Morrison has served his purpose. He provided the banking evidence that confirmed what we already knew, that our security protocols needed updating. His research dies with him tonight. No, Sarah raised her weapon higher, finger on the trigger. I won't let you kill him. Captain, you're outnumbered 4-1 by professional operators. This doesn't end well for you. Maybe not, but it doesn't end well for Klaus either. The team leader's expression hardened. We have orders to take you alive if possible. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Orders from who? People who understand that 40 years of intelligence assets are worth more than one idealistic Army officer's desire for justice. Sarah backed toward the wall, keeping Klaus between herself and the tactical team. How many others have you killed to protect him? 17 over 4 decades, Klaus said with something approaching pride. All potential security breaches, all eliminated before they could compromise ongoing operations. Your family was just part of a larger pattern. You're monsters. We're professionals. There's a difference. The sound of sirens reached them from outside, growing louder. Multiple vehicles moving fast toward the estate. Klaus frowned. That's not part of the plan. Sir, we have vehicles approaching, one of the tactical team reported into his radio. Multiple units, lights and sirens. Who did you call, Captain? The team leader demanded. No one. But Sarah felt a surge of hope. Someone was coming, and Klaus's people weren't expecting them. The lead tactical operator spoke into his earpiece. Control, this is Blue Team. We have multiple law enforcement vehicles approaching target location. Request guidance. He listened, then his face went pale. Sir, we have a problem. Those are FBI units. Someone's blown our operation. Through the dining room windows, Sarah could see flashlight beams moving across the grounds. Red and blue strobes painted the trees in emergency colors. Klaus, we need to evacuate now, the team leader said urgently. No. Klaus's voice was steel. We finish this here. Eliminate the witnesses, destroy the evidence, claim it was a terrorist attack. We've done it before. Sir, those are federal agents. We can't. You can and you will. I have 40 years of intelligence on people who could destroy careers, topple governments, start wars. If I go down, I take half of Washington with me. The tactical team exchanged glances. Sarah could see the calculation in their eyes, follow orders and risk a firefight with the FBI, or cut their losses and run. FBI, federal agents! The shout came from the front of the house, amplified by megaphones. Evacuate the building now. Last chance, Captain, Klaus said, pulling out a second pistol from his jacket. Join us or die with Morrison and whoever sent those agents. I'd rather die than work with you. That can be arranged. Klaus raised his weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She dove behind the china cabinet as gunfire erupted. Klaus's shot shattered porcelain above her head, while the tactical team opened up with automatic weapons. But they weren't shooting at her. They were shooting at Klaus. Sorry, sir, the team leader said as Klaus collapsed, blood spreading across his white shirt. Orders changed. You've become too much of a liability. Klaus stared up at them, his face twisted with shock and betrayal. You can't. I have insurance. Files that will destroy. Files that were retrieved 3 hours ago. We've been planning your retirement for months, Klaus. Tonight just moved up the timeline. The team leader turned to Sarah. Captain Brooks, you need to come with us. Now, before the FB, I gets inside. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't understand. The people who sent those FBI agents aren't here to rescue you. They're here to eliminate everyone who knows about Operation Paperclip, including you. Through the windows, Sarah could see tactical teams surrounding the house. Professional movement, night vision equipment, serious firepower. Who are they? Competition, another intelligence agency that wants Klaus's files for themselves. If they get you, you'll disappear into a black site interrogation program and never be seen again. Klaus made a wet, choking sound. Blood frothed from his mouth as he tried to speak. The Swiss account, he gasped. Codes. In the safe. His eyes went glassy. Klaus Richter, who had survived 40 years of secrets and murder, was finally dead. Captain, we need to move, the team leader said urgently. Back exit, through the gardens. Our extraction team is waiting. What about Frank Morrison? Already secured. He's with our people. Sarah looked at Klaus's body, then at the armed men who just murdered him to keep their secrets safe. Outside, the FBI was closing in, but according to these operatives, they were just another threat. How do I know you won't kill me once we're clear? Because we need you alive. You're Helen Brooks's granddaughter, a decorated Army officer, and the only person who can testify that Klaus Richter died resisting arrest after confessing to 40 years of war crimes. You want me to lie. We want you to tell a version of the truth that serves American interests. Klaus was a Nazi war criminal who infiltrated American intelligence and murdered U.S. citizens. Tonight, justice was finally served. And the intelligence operation that protected him? Never existed. Klaus acted alone, covering his tracks for 40 years until brave investigators finally exposed him. The front door exploded inward as federal agents breached the house. Sarah heard boots on hardwood, commands being shouted, tactical teams clearing rooms. Last chance, Captain, the team leader said. Come with us and live to see justice done, or stay here and disappear into a system that will bury you to protect state secrets. Sarah looked at Klaus's corpse, thinking about her grandmother's murder, her family's systematic elimination, Frank Morrison's 40 years of investigation, about the choice between messy truth and convenient lies. I'm staying. Captain, I'm staying. My grandmother died for the truth. So will I, if necessary. The team leader nodded reluctantly. Your choice. But remember, we tried to save you. The tactical team disappeared through the back of the house as FBI agents stormed into the dining room. Sarah raised her hands, Klaus's pistol at her feet, surrounded by the wreckage of 40 years of secrets. "I'm Captain Sarah Brooks, U.S. Army Medical Corps," she called out. "I'm the one who called this in." Which wasn't true, but might keep her alive long enough to find out who had really sent the cavalry, and whether they were any better than the monsters they'd just displaced. The FBI agents who secured the dining room moved with practiced efficiency, but Sarah noticed something wrong immediately. Their tactical gear was pristine, their weapons too clean, their formation too perfect for a rushed response to her non-existent call. "Agent Patterson, FBI," the team leader announced, holstering his sidearm. He was tall, gray-haired, with intelligent eyes that took in every detail of the scene. "You said you called this in, Captain Brooks?" "That's right." Sarah kept her hands visible, watching for tells in Patterson's body language. "Interesting, because we've been monitoring this location for 3 months, waiting for Klaus Richter to make contact with his remaining network." Patterson knelt beside Klaus's body, checking for vitals. "Looks like someone beat us to him." He pulled a gun. "I defended myself." 4 bullet wounds, tight grouping, professional execution. Patterson looked up at her. "You're quite the marksman, Captain. I had good training." Army Medical Corps doesn't typically include advanced firearms training. Patterson stood studying the bullet patterns in the walls. "This looks more like special operations work." Sarah said nothing. Patterson was probing, looking for inconsistencies in her story. But he was also giving her information. The FBI had been watching Klaus for months, which meant they knew about his real identity. "Agent Patterson, are you familiar with Operation Paperclip?" His expression shifted slightly. "That's classified information, Captain. So is Klaus Richter's true identity. Yet here we are." Patterson glanced at his team, then made a subtle gesture. The other agents moved away, giving them privacy for conversation. "How much do you know about Klaus's activities since 1945? "I know he murdered my grandmother in 1942 for exposing his conspiracy with German intelligence. I know he's been systematically eliminating potential witnesses for 40 years. And I know he was being protected by people in the U.S. government." Protected is a strong word. Monitored might be more accurate. Monitored while he killed American citizens? Patterson walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where crime scene teams were setting up floodlights. "Captain, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Klaus Richter was one of the most valuable intelligence assets in American history. He was a Nazi war criminal. He was a Nazi war criminal who provided intelligence that prevented Soviet expansion into Western Europe, stopped 3 separate terrorist attacks on American soil, and helped us track funding for international criminal organizations for 4 decades. Sarah felt sick. "So you let him murder people to protect that intelligence?" "We contained him. Klaus's activities were limited to eliminating direct threats to operational security. Your grandmother's investigation would have exposed not just Klaus, but dozens of other former German officers who were providing critical intelligence during the Cold War." "My father? My grandfather?" "Collateral damage in a larger war. I'm sorry for your loss, but their deaths prevented the exposure of intelligence networks that saved thousands of other lives." Sarah stared at Patterson, realizing she was talking to another monster in a suit. "You're no better than he was. I'm a patriot who makes hard choices to protect American interests. Klaus Richter served this country well, but times change. His usefulness ended when the Soviet Union collapsed. We've been planning his retirement for years." "Retirement?" "Termination with extreme prejudice. Tonight's operation wasn't a rescue mission, Captain. It was an execution order." Patterson turned back to face her. "The question now is what to do with you." "I've committed no crimes." You've been investigating classified intelligence operations compromising national security and interfering with ongoing federal investigations. That's enough to charge you under the Espionage Act. Or you accept that justice has been served. Klaus Richter is dead, his criminal network is being dismantled, and your grandmother's murder has been avenged. The full truth stays classified, but the essential truth, that Klaus was a war criminal who finally paid for his crimes, becomes part of the public record. Sarah thought about Frank Morrison, supposedly secured by the CIA team that had killed Klaus. What happened to Frank Morrison? Mr. Morrison suffered a heart attack during tonight's operation. Very sad. The stress of confronting Klaus after 40 years of investigation was apparently too much for his system. Another murder disguised as natural causes. Sarah wondered how many others would die tonight to clean up loose ends. And if I refuse to stay quiet? Then you'll be charged with multiple felonies, court-martialed, and sentenced to life in military prison. Your story about Klaus being a protected intelligence asset will be dismissed as the delusional fantasies of a disgraced officer who murdered an innocent businessman. Patterson pulled out his phone and showed her a screen. We've already prepared the evidence. Klaus Brennan was a pillar of the community who discovered you breaking into his home. You shot him in cold blood, then constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory to justify murder. Very sad case of a disturbed veteran suffering from PTSD. Sarah realized she was trapped. The FBI had arrived not to rescue her, but to clean up the Klaus Richter problem permanently. Everyone who knew the truth was either dead or about to be silenced. There is a third option, Patterson said quietly. Which is? Join the operation. You're a decorated officer with security clearance and family connections to this case. We could use someone with your background to help manage similar situations in the future. You want me to become part of the cover-up? I want you to become part of the solution. Klaus was one of hundreds of former Nazi officials who provided intelligence during the Cold War. Most served their purpose and died natural deaths. But some are still alive, still potential security risks. We need people who can handle the delicate work of managing their retirement. Sarah understood. They were offering her Klaus's job, hunting down aging Nazi intelligence assets and eliminating them when they became liabilities. How many others are there? Currently, 17 confirmed assets still living, ages 75 to 92, all with intelligence value that's declining as they age, all potential security risks if their true identities become public. 17 more Klaus Richters. 17 more difficult choices that need to be made by people who understand the larger picture. Patterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. Your grandmother died trying to expose Klaus Richter. You could spend your life honoring her memory by helping us eliminate the others. Justice served, American security protected, and a very comfortable salary for your efforts. Sarah looked at Klaus's body, thinking about her grandmother's final radio transmission 40 years ago. Helen had been trying to expose a conspiracy that went all the way to the top of American intelligence. That conspiracy was still alive, still killing people, still offering new recruits the chance to serve their country by becoming murderers. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, we move forward with or without your cooperation. Patterson signaled his team. Process the scene, document everything, prepare the official report. Mr. Brennan was killed during a home invasion. Captain Brooks acted in self-defense. What about the evidence Klaus had? The banking records? The files on other Nazi assets? Already secured. Klaus's safe was opened 3 hours ago by our technical team. All materials are now in federal custody. As FBI agents swarmed through the house, Sarah realized that Klaus's death had solved nothing. The system that had protected him for 40 years was still intact, still operating, still recruiting new operatives to do its dirty work. Her grandmother's fight for justice had ended exactly where it started, with government officials covering up Nazi war crimes in the name of national security. But Sarah Brooks wasn't finished. she had one more card to play. "Agent Patterson," she called out as he headed for the door. "You should know that I made copies of everything: banking records, Klaus's confessions, documentation of the intelligence operation that protected him. Insurance, you might say." Patterson stopped, his back to her. "Where?" "Safe deposit box, different state, different name. If anything happens to me, if I have any kind of accident or natural death, those files go to every major newspaper in the country." When Patterson turned around, his expression was cold. "That would be very unwise, Captain." "So was murdering my grandmother, but Klaus did it anyway, and look how that turned out for him." "You're playing a dangerous game." "I learned from the best. 40 years of watching Klaus Richter taught my family a lot about survival." Sarah walked toward the front door, agent stepping aside to let her pass. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning, but Agent Patterson, I suggest you start thinking about what justice really looks like, because my grandmother's story is going to be told one way or another." Outside, crime scene floodlights turned Klaus Brennan's estate into a stage set for the final act of a 40-year cover-up. Sarah got into her car and drove away, knowing that by morning she would either be part of the conspiracy that had murdered her family or the next target for elimination. But for the first time since finding that photograph, she felt like she had a chance to win. Klaus Richter was dead. Now it was time to kill the system that had protected him. Sarah didn't go back to her motel. Instead, she drove to the 24-hour Kinko's in downtown Fayetteville and spent 3 hours making copies of everything: Frank Morrison's research, the banking records, Klaus's confession, even photos of his dead body taken with her phone. By sunrise, identical packages sat in safe deposit boxes in 3 different states, post office boxes under false names, and with attorneys who had instructions to release everything to the media if Sarah died or disappeared. Patterson might think he held all the cards, but Sarah had learned Klaus's most important lesson: always have insurance. At 7:30 a.m., she walked into the Fort Bragg Criminal Investigation Division office and found Agent Patterson waiting with Colonel Williams, the base commander. "Captain Brooks," Colonel Williams said, rising from behind his desk. "Agent Patterson has briefed me on last night's incident. I understand you killed an intruder during a home invasion." "That's one way to describe it." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Captain, have you reconsidered our discussion?" "I have. The answer is no." "Then you're under arrest for the murder of Carl Brennan, conspiracy to commit espionage, and violation of the Official Secrets Act." Patterson nodded to 2 MPs who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Colonel Williams," Sarah said quickly, "I invoke my right to speak with a congressional representative before being placed under arrest, as provided for under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act." Williams frowned. "Agent Patterson, is Captain Brooks considered a whistleblower in this matter?" "She's considered a security risk who's interfering with classified operations." "But is she reporting potential wrongdoing by government officials?" Patterson's jaw tightened. "Colonel, this is a federal matter. Your jurisdiction." "My jurisdiction covers any military personnel on this base who requests congressional protection under federal whistleblower statutes." Williams picked up his phone. "I'm calling Congressman Morrison's office. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee." "Morrison?" Sarah felt a chill. "Is he related to—" "Frank Morrison was my uncle," Williams said. "The OSS communications officer who spent 40 years investigating war crimes. He called me 3 days ago, said he was finally close to exposing the truth about something that happened in Italy." Patterson went pale. "Colonel, Frank Morrison died of natural causes." "Frank Morrison was murdered last night to cover up a conspiracy involving Nazi war criminals and U.S. intelligence operations," Sarah said. "I have evidence proving it." Williams set down his phone. "What kind of evidence?" "Banking records showing payments from German sources to American officers. Confessions from Klaus Richter about murdering OSS agents. Documentation proving that the CIA has been protecting Nazi war criminals for 40 years. That's classified information obtained through illegal means, Patterson said desperately. It's evidence of war crimes and ongoing criminal conspiracy, Sarah shot back, protected under both military and civilian whistleblower statutes. Williams studied Patterson's face, reading the panic there. Agent Patterson, you're dismissed from this base immediately. Captain Brooks is under my protection pending congressional review of her allegations. Colonel, you don't understand the national security implications. I understand that my uncle spent 40 years fighting for justice and was murdered 3 days after contacting me about Nazi war criminals. That's all I need to understand. 2 base security officers appeared as if summoned. Escort Agent Patterson to the gate, Williams ordered. He's not welcome on this installation. After Patterson left, Williams turned to Sarah. You said you have evidence? Copies in multiple locations. The originals are probably already destroyed, but I made sure the truth would survive, even if I didn't. What do you need from me? Protection while I testify to Congress, and help getting this story to people who can act on it. Williams picked up his phone again. I'm calling the Washington Post, the New York Times, and every member of the House Intelligence Committee. If there's a 40-year cover-up involving Nazi war criminals, it ends today. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in Williams's office watching news vans arrive at the base gate. Her story was already breaking on cable news. Army officer exposes Nazi war criminal protected by CIA. The phone hadn't stopped ringing. Congressional staffers, reporters, Justice Department officials, all demanding interviews and documentation. Captain Brooks? Williams handed her a phone. Congressman Morrison wants to speak with you. The voice on the other end was elderly but strong. Captain, this is Robert Morrison. Frank was my brother. I want you to know that justice will be served. Thank you, Congressman. I'm sorry about Frank. He died trying to honor my grandmother's memory. Frank spent 40 years fighting for this day. His death won't be in vain. By evening, the story had exploded across every major news outlet. Klaus Richter's true identity was confirmed through German military records. Banking documents proved the Swiss account payments, and Sarah's testimony about the intelligence operation protecting him was corroborated by 3 other whistleblowers who came forward once the story broke. Sarah watched the news coverage from a secure conference room at Fort Bragg, surrounded by federal marshals and congressional investigators. On CNN, a retired CIA officer was explaining how Operation Paperclip had recruited former Nazi officials for intelligence work during the Cold War. The program officially ended in the 1950s, he said, but Captain Brooks's evidence suggests that some assets continued operating under CIA protection for decades. The anchor pressed him. Are you saying the U.S. government knowingly harbored Nazi war criminals? I'm saying that intelligence agencies sometimes make morally questionable choices in service of larger strategic goals. Whether those choices were justified is now a matter for Congress and the Justice Department to determine. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your grandmother would be proud. A friend. She stared at the message, wondering who had sent it. Then she remembered Kowalski, the old man who'd started her on this path. He was probably watching the news coverage, finally seeing justice done after 92 years of life. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young woman in a business suit entered, followed by 2 men in dark clothing. Captain Brooks? I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Chen. These gentlemen are with the Justice Department's Nazi War Crimes Unit. I thought that unit was disbanded years ago. It was reactivated this morning. We'll be investigating every aspect of the Klaus Richter case and the intelligence operation that protected him. Your testimony will be crucial to our prosecution. Prosecution of who? Klaus is dead. Klaus Richter was one piece of a larger puzzle. We've identified 17 other former Nazi officials who may have been protected by similar arrangements. Some are still alive. Chen opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We're also investigating current and former CIA officials who participated in the cover-up. Agent Patterson was arrested 2 hours ago on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. What about the other tactical team, the ones who actually killed Klaus? In federal custody, they're cooperating fully in exchange for reduced sentences. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. So it's really over? The cover-up is over. The investigation is just beginning. But, Captain, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward has exposed one of the longest-running criminal conspiracies in American intelligence history. Chen handed her a document. This is a Justice Department commendation recognizing your service to the country. It will be presented by the Attorney General next week. Sarah read the citation, then looked up at Chen. What about my grandmother? Will she finally get recognition for what she really did? The Army is preparing a posthumous award for Lieutenant Helen Brooks. She'll be recognized as a war hero who died trying to expose Nazi infiltration of Allied intelligence operations. And my family? My father and grandfather? The FBI is opening investigations into both deaths. If they were murdered to cover up Klaus's crimes, that will be part of the larger prosecution. Sarah nodded, feeling tears she'd been holding back for days. My grandmother's name will be cleared. Your grandmother's name will be honored. Helen Brooks died a hero, and history will remember her that way. That evening, Sarah drove to the Confederate cemetery where Helen was buried. The sun was setting, painting the weathered headstones in golden light. She knelt beside the simple granite marker, brushing away fallen leaves. It's done, Grandmother. Klaus is dead, the conspiracy is exposed, and everyone's going to know who you really were. The wind moved through the old oak trees, rustling leaves like whispers from the past. Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small American flag, planting it beside Helen's headstone. Lieutenant Helen Brooks, American war hero. That's how they'll remember you now. As Sarah walked back to her car, she thought about Frank Morrison, who'd spent 40 years fighting for this moment, about her father and grandfather, whose natural deaths were finally being investigated as murders, about Klaus Richter, who'd lived 40 years longer than he deserved but had finally faced justice. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but Sarah answered anyway. Captain Brooks? This is Colonel Patricia Valdez, U.S. Army Intelligence. I wonder if you'd be interested in a new assignment? What kind of assignment? We're forming a special unit to investigate other Operation Paperclip assets who may still be alive. Former Nazi officials who've been living under false identities for decades. The unit will need someone with your investigative skills and moral courage. Sarah smiled, looking back at Helen's grave one more time. Hunting Nazi war criminals? Bringing them to justice, finally. When do I start? Monday morning. Welcome to the team, Captain. Sarah hung up and drove away from the cemetery, knowing that her grandmother's fight for justice was finally finished. But her own fight was just beginning. There were 16 more Klaus Richters out there, living comfortable lives built on blood and lies. Time to remind them that justice, even delayed by 40 years, eventually comes for everyone.